All right, I'll start with this one because this, I guess, picks up directly after Sam's
Sure.
presentation. How do we hold the people behind the algorithm to account?
Well, that's a question of professional ethics, isn't it? Like we have it in accounting, we have it in law, in medicine. So we do need external bodies, but as I'm arguing there, sooner or later, it's an infinite regress. So usually society holds the individual to account, but who holds society to account? And that's the classic problem that's confounded people in ethics all along. Is it just a social contract? Do we just look at consequences? Are there codes of conduct? And I say, in the end, I would argue that's where, as a Christian, you have an easy out. Yeah, you know, Deus ex machina. Well, in the end, there's something that transcends me, the individual, something that transcends society and its contracts, something that transcends codes of conduct. And is there an external reference point that I can look to? And for me, as a Christian ethicist, I say, well, there's a God, and he gets to say what's good, what's bad, what's true, and what's fake.
Do you want to offer anything?
I think you've done well there.
So you're saying that God kind of anchors...
Well, yeah, and I know we always say, well, you can't pull the God card out of your
just
card.
did, yeah.
I know, but that's why you can argue about ethics for 2,000 to 4,000 years, because in the end, you can always push someone to say, well, you say, well, how do you say this society has it right? And you say, you can't in the end. So without an external reference point, there's no chance for moral reform, because whatever is good now will be bad in 10 years' time, and vice versa. And you can't call other societies and critique other societies, but we do that all the time.
Right, okay. Also, people are really firing up with you, Sam.
I know.
Who gets to judge what is good outcomes and what the bad outcomes are?
Yeah, that's right. And we get this all the time. So in business, right, what is good for the seller is not good for the buyer, and vice versa. What is good for the individual is not good for the corporate. And we see it even with the AI, where we're dealing this delicate dance between privacy and functionality. And interestingly, like in San Francisco, they preferred privacy over functionality, but in China, they preferred functionality over privacy. And that's why their apps like WeChat and all that have boomed, because they're prepared to give up privacy. And so in the end, who are we talking about? So you can even talk about, so you end up with the utilitarian concept, you know, greatest good for the greatest number of people, but who gets to decide? So in the end, that's where I think at least Aristotle has it right. So rather than looking at consequences only, rather than looking at action only, you're looking at the actor, the virtue, and say, is this who I want to be? Do I like who I've become? So if we don't want to play the God card, maybe there's simple diagnostic questions we can ask first. Is this who I want to be? Is this who I want my society to be? Do we like who we've become? Like, have we sold our soul for this outcome?
And do you reckon, Craig, you could ever program that kind of thinking into general artificial intelligence?
Look, I think the concept of utilitarian theory, you can actually program in what's going to be the best for the most people. But again, it comes down to who's going to make those value trade-offs.
And at the moment, is it Google and all the big tech companies that say don't be evil, but sometimes don't always live up to that?
Well,
they're the ones that are controlling the future, right? When it comes to AI, they're investing heavily.
Absolutely, and I think that most corporates are, at the end of the day, no matter what they're saying, you know, they've got shareholders and they're wanting to make a return. So most of the models that we see, whether it's Google or Facebook, are fundamentally around how to actually monetize the great technology that we've got.
Yeah, so again, and here's the problem with utilitarian theory. It says greatest good for the greatest number of people, and that seems to just roll off the tongue. But that means automatically you're privileging the majority. And again, you're marginalising the weak, the poor, the underrepresented, and the marginalised by definition. And so that's the problem with utilitarian theory. So again, we have to go back to virtue theory. Is this who I want my society to be? Is this what I want my corporation to be? Is this who I want to be?
Okay, so someone would love to hear both of your views on the dangers or benefits of social media. You mentioned there's an algorithmic element that's going on in social media. How about Craig? Why don't you kick us off?
Look, I think social media is great in many ways. I'm actually a Facebook fan, and I'm a Facebook fan for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's incredibly efficient at keeping in contact with a bunch of people that you otherwise would lose track of. You know, so we're working in the UK 20 years ago, and we just don't have enough time to get around to talk to all of the friends that you've made over decades. But with Facebook, you can actually see what they're up to in a photo, and just it works really well. The downside, I guess, is that social media, from my perspective, it kind of amplifies both the good and the bad. And so, especially with being a parent of children, the idea that in decades gone past, you might have problems that are happening in the playground. But you come home and there's kind of a respite from it, Yes, there's phones and things like that, but now social media has the ability, if unchecked, to have that 24/7. So the comments and the kind of the conflicts or the problems that you're having at school can continue to go on. And I think that's emblematic of kind of the bad outcomes, by using technology. Is it's kind of over, it's always on, and it amplifies kind of, the human emotion.
What about the algorithmic element, though? We are getting shown stuff that
Totally.
is actually going to shape us and make us think we understand reality when it's really quite a skewed perception of it.
Absolutely. Well, we're in the era of fake news. The algorithms were implicated, obviously, in election results, and the problem is that it's there's two things that will. The first thing that algorithms will actually entrench your thinking. So that's one of the things that we've seen is you've got this fragmentation of media now. So if you like a particular view, the algorithms will tend, to want to send you more of that content, to reinforce your biases, because they know that you'll get the clicks. So I think in one sense, unabated, it's going to actually reduce diversity of thought out there. But there's no doubt that, we've sort of seen in some of the inquiries around Cambridge Analytica, for instance, we're using working with Facebook to actually get bad outcomes that were obviously from a commercial point of view, but from a human point of view, not very good at all.
Is this where the virtue ethics comes back in? Because if making money is the kind of main goal.
Yeah, so we're seeing here, again, what's happening in the history of humanity every time we come up with an amazing invention, what philosophers call the double power paradox. Whatever has power to do much good has the same equal power to do much harm. We saw with the invention of the wheel, great, until young people jump on motorbikes and kill themselves. The invention of the fire, the invention of the ladder, and now we're seeing with the invention of AI, much power to do much good, but with it, much power to do much evil and harm. And so again, it comes down to the actor. What is my intention? Who am I? What is my character? And that is the difference between a gift and a bribe. If you think about it, same action, same outcome, but what was my motive? What is the character of the actor behind the action? And interesting with social media, they've then done studies, like apparently the rate of depression using Facebook is like 100%. And part of it is it just plays on our insecurities. Part of it is I put up a post, but I didn't get as many likes as I thought I would, so you're depressed. Or you see your friend holidaying in Paris, I'm not in Paris. Or they bought a new car, I don't have a new car. So it comes down again, well, who am I? Where is my value? Where is my worth? If we can get those things sorted out, then it won't be so destructive.
Okay, I think this arrived at the beginning of Sam's presentation. Can you expand on what makes us human?
Oh, yeah. So what makes us human, right? It's fascinating because Yuval Noah Harari, he says in the end, we're just a complex set of algorithm ourselves. And that's why computers will be able to biohack us because they will know us better than we know ourselves. They'll have a greater access to greater amounts of data than what we do. So the natural materialist reductionist explanation of human is that's all we are. We're just atoms and molecules, neural pathways, neurotransmitters, functioning on an algorithm of risk, reward, survival, and that's all we are. So any talk of free will, consciousness, and human rights is an illusion. It's been a useful fictional story that we've been telling ourselves to get us through each day, but in the end, that's all it is, fiction. And that's what Yuval Noah Harari says, and he's quite comfortable with that, because we're just replacing one algorithm for another algorithm. And we can be comfortable with that, but we don't live that way. As I was trying to say with the Me Too movement, the call-out culture, we're saying, no, buddy, you had free will, you had moral autonomy, and so therefore you have moral accountability. So the whole system of morality presumes that we have free will, consciousness, mind, and the whole reason why we don't harm another human being is they have inherent worth, value, dignity, and human rights. So we don't live according to that script. It seems to us way more than just a useful fiction that we tell ourselves. So then what are we? I want to say we're more than the sum of our parts. And I worked as a doctor, and I still remember this cringeworthy moment. We're working in the emergency room, and a nurse got over the loudspeaker system and said, "Could someone take the broken arm to Bay 13, please?" And we just cringed. We thought, oh, how dehumanising, because a human being is more than just a disease and body part, or are we? And that's the thing. So Joanna Bryson critiques us for anthropomorphizing an algorithm, like it's just ones and zeros. But are we guilty of doing the same ourselves, anthropomorphizing really just atoms and molecules? Like we seem to say we have a consciousness. So are we just playing a game with ourselves, or are we more than some of us? Is there something such as consciousness, free will, and human rights? We live that way. And again, fortunately for me, because I can pull out the Christian tradition card, I can say, well, that is the difference. We have a God who loves us, who made us and made us in his image. And we all seem to live that way.
But clearly, Yuval Noah Harari isn't really popular, and people are lapping his stuff up. So where has, I suppose, the kind of narrative that you're suggesting gone wrong, that people are listening into this idea that humans are complex algorithms and just kind of going, yeah, we are? Like, where are the people saying, no, what about
I think it's a very attractive story, because it says, hey, it's a reduction story, it's a convenience story, and it removes accountability, if you think about it. It removes, and so we're free to make choices, but it takes away accountability.
You mean like my neurons made me do it rather than I did
something like
it?
that, yeah.
Yeah, right, okay. If God made man in his image, then what does this mean for AI? Do humans make AI in their image as well? Thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of the AI at the moment is being tasked on very narrow things. As we sort of talked about, there's a lot of companies that are trying to make more and more human-like AI. There's all kinds of bots. I was researching, I found a new word called flirt tech, which is an interesting concept. I don't recommend you necessarily researching that on your own, but the whole idea about AI to actually sort of replace or augment human relationships. So there's no doubt that that people are looking for AI to actually become more human, and that can obviously be used for good and obviously for bad as well.
Actually, I wanted to pick you up on that. Did you mention, Craig, that there'll be some forms of AI that might be used to care for the infirm and elderly? What did you mean by that?
Look, it probably comes back to the quadrant that Sam showed. Is that one way the future could pan out is that we've actually got more time to actually invest more in the in the kind of human-focused, empathetic vocations, which would be awesome. If that's not the case, though, we know that sort of there's a shortage generally of having people to care. And sometimes people need 24/7 care. We know that in the elderly that are in retirement villages in care, there's a whole heap of loneliness. So I think that there would definitely be. I think they're trying to solve those problems already with kind of AI-like companions.
Yeah, there's something called Paro, the seal, or something like that.
Yep.
It's a robot, like Seal Pup. But I don't know how we feel about our grandma being looked after by a seal. But I mean, I guess it would kind of ease your conscience if you can't get there on a certain day. But like, it may be too easy to just go, she can be appeased with a robot.
I think that's right, and I think that's where a lot of AI starts off it's the convenience factor. Everybody would know that the human interaction is the best, but if you don't have that available, then maybe these increasingly realistic human-like AIs are going to be good enough for many.
Do you think, Sam, I mean, you in exploring that quadrant, you suggested that there'll be more time freed up to devote work towards more empathetic, kind of loving, service-oriented ends. But really, let's be honest, the caring is hard work. We would want to outsource that, surely.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating because Kai-Fu Lee, and I recommend you look up his TED Talk, his hope is it will free us up for these caring tasks and see value in these caring tasks. So he would challenge us, well, where do we find value? Where do we find purpose? Because I remember like 100 years ago, you can find these ridiculous articles that said, because of the invention of the photocopier, the microwave, and the vacuum cleaner, we're going to have so much free time of leisure. We're not going to overwork ourselves, but we end up working more even though we're way more efficient than we were 100 years ago, because we, again, find value in all the wrong places. And that's what Kai Fu Lee would say. He's repentant that he found too much value in his work to the point where he was going to leave his wife giving birth to a child to take a conference call with Silicon Valley. So what on earth has happened to me? I've become so task-orientated, not people-orientated. So again, if we can find purpose in giving and serving rather than gaining, if we see value in each and every human being, especially in the weak, the poor, and the marginalised, and we see that the AI has freed us up in this area of life, then we can devote ourselves in the other quadrant of life.
So you're quite optimistic in some ways?
I can see how we can turn a threat into an opportunity, but it all comes down to who we are, like the operator, the actor, rather than the action.
And what about those people in that other quadrant, like the bottom quadrant here, whose jobs are threatened? How will they be cared for in a new society where they're redundant in that sense of the term?
Yeah, well, the pessimists will say, oh my gosh, they've become redundant. But the optimists will say it will open up other sectors of other forms of employment, which we don't have right now.
Okay. Craig, can you tell us a bit about the people behind AI? Are they normal people? What motivates
What
them?
is normal? What is normal? Oh, look, I think I'm not one of those Silicon Valley geniuses, but clearly they've got something special. Especially if you're thinking about the Mark Zuckerbergs or some of the other brilliant people. In terms of what sort of motivates them, I think they've started off with an idea and not with the trying to be rich. I think they love the tech. They love creating things. I know the people in my team, definitely the enjoyment of actually putting together essentially a little machine, a little digital machine that does stuff that's cool and it runs on its own. That's kind of the pleasure. That's the motivation, I guess, for a lot of these tech people that have started these companies. And I think that sort of motivates, some of the greatest pioneers. Kurzweil, obviously he's made a lot of money, but he's still this passionate believer. He still is absolutely, keen on seeing where this is all going. He founded his own Singularity University. So he's kind of, branched out into so many areas in which he's, kind of trying to teach and get people excited about the future.
Would you say they have, tech people or AI enthusiasts have more of a machine logic to them, or are they kind of emotionally intelligent? Especially
it's very interesting, and if you do your Myers-Briggs temperament analysis, I would definitely say that there's a pattern. There's certainly a pattern in terms of people in the kind of analytical, mathematically inclined fields, to the more, this is generalisation. It's more introverted, without a doubt. And people that are sort of very happy, kind of in rich inner life, intuitive thinking. One of the things though that we are seeing is that people are recognising, even in the data science industry, that at the end of the day, the process element of data science is actually getting automated as well. So automation is being turned back into the job, and there's technology at the moment that will build algorithms for you automatically. You just hook up your data. So there's recognition that to be successful into the future, you can't just be relying on your mathematics, because at the end of the day, some of the mathematics is a process. So there's a knowledge that the interpersonal skills, being able to communicate, being able to actually connect the dots, being able to network is going to be increasingly important in the future.
I remember when I saw both of you mention something like this, and I just kept thinking, the future is female, I swear.
Well, if you match it, to some of those qualities, there's probably an argument for it.
You heard it here, right here. So let's talk about Ray Kurzweil, because I have to admit, when he talked about, we can scan the brain, we can upload the consciousness to a machine, I was like, human life is way more than just simply your thoughts, it's like what you eat, it's like what you find beautiful, it's all these sorts of things. It's an embodied experience. It's like cuddling your kids, or, kissing the cheek of your toddler, or if you're a man, cuddling maybe a nice hot young woman or something like that. So these are embodied experiences that are critical to being human. How does he kind of think that he's not missing out by preaching this kind of digital immortality, life in the machine?
Well, I guess it comes down to that reductionist, philosophy. Is that yes, we are embodied. There's a bit of idea of thinking in the body as well, not just solely in the brain. The brain in the vat idea has sort of gone out of fashion a little bit. But at the end of the day, if there's no sort of something that is as transcending, the biology, the machine that we are, then essentially he could scan every electron, neuron, every molecule, every atom on our body and reproduce that in some kind of other substrate or a digital format of that. And the idea is that, again, a materialist view could get there. Now, it's disputed, but there's certainly a lot of people actually working on this.
Do you have anything you want to add, Sam?
Well, it is fascinating, because all a computer does is perceive data and convert it to ones and zeros. But as a doctor, I can tell you that's all our brain is doing as well. So I'm just seeing photons from coming here, hitting the back of my brain, and it's just going ones and zeros, ones and zeros, ones and zeros. So it's again forcing us to say, well, what's the ghost inside the machine that's working out what to do with the ones and zeros?
Correct.
I don't really know how to take this question, but maybe you do. How would modern people critique Aristotle's ethics? How would secular people, Christians or Muslims?
Well, modernity, so I could give you a crash course in the history of ethics, but modernity threw out two major forms of ethical systems. One was Immanuel Kant's deontology, so we need principles and codes of ethics. The other one was John Stuart Mill and consequentialism, so look at utilitarianism. And hopefully in my brief 2 minutes there, I was able to show you the flaws of codes of ethics because it leads to a very reductionist view of morality, where you're trying to see how much you can get away with, or how little you can get away with. And consequentialism, well, who gets to make the decision? Like, good for whom? So when you dropped the atomic bomb on Japan, it was good because it ended the war, but it wasn't very good for the people who dropped the bomb on. So who gets to make that transcendent decision on what's good? So I think we wanted to get away from virtue ethics, but it's interesting that in the 21st century, we've seen how these two reductionist views led us, with a very thin view of morality. So we're returning back to virtue ethics, I think.
But it's a harder conversation to have, right? Because you're forced to tangle with the truth, goodness, beauty, all these things you can't quantify, really.
That's right. And it forces us into what's called a teleological concept of good.
Okay,
that really
you have to explain what that is.
What makes something good in the end is it fulfills its purpose. It does what it's designed for. So what makes a good pen a good pen? Well, it writes. Well, why should a pen write? Well, but that's what it was designed for. So it forces us to talk of design, purpose, and then it forces us again into that uncomfortable area where if there's design, who's the designer? And there's a designer behind every designer. But I think it's a good place to start, and it gives us a richer, more multi-layered view of morality than just consequentialism and deontology.
Okay, is your brain hurting right now? Okay, here's a hypothetical. If a driverless car kills someone, who is to blame?
I'll kick off. I'll give you time to think. How's that sound?
That's great.
I'll be the guy that swings and misses, and then you can swing your home run. Well, it's fascinating because when they used to teach ethics, they used to come up with all these ridiculous hypotheticals. A boat is sinking. Do you give the life raft to the 80-year-old man or the 8-year-old girl? So now you got to work out, this dilemma. Well, that's what the driverless car is being asked to do now. Do I kill the driver or send the car into the crowd? So someone's had to come up with an algorithm. And as Joanna Bryson says, there's a person behind the algorithm. These algorithms are just ones and zeros in the end. So who is the person behind the algorithm? So someone, has to be accountable. So there's always moral responsibility. And so then you could say, is it the programmer? Is it the corporation behind the programmer? But it's interesting, as human beings, we can never get away with this idea that, yes, there's moral autonomy and there's moral accountability.
So even if the whole humans are complex algorithm seems to get rid of that, then actually we're forced to butt up against it eventually.
Yeah. At some stage, there was a free choice and there's moral accountability.
Thoughts, Craig?
Yeah, look, this is one, obviously, working in an insurance company, we've actually thought about, quite a bit. And I guess that the simple answer from just a technical point of view is that if the AI is stuffed up and the reason for the accident is actually not anyone else's fault, it's actually the car, then liability is clear, in terms of it being the program, or the company. If it's a bad outcome, so somebody's swerving into you or a little kid runs in front, then it becomes difficult because, as Sam was saying, you have to make a choice. And there's different views around that because one concept is, and it's around transparency in AI, that the way in which it will select probably needs to be open, and basically when the product is sold and when we get driverless cars, there probably has to be legislation to actually open up that concept of how is that going to be programmed and how is it going to make its choice. Now, I guess the thing is that humans do that anyway. So if the human was there rather than the computer, they're going to have to make a value judgment as to whether to swerve, and hit the child or put themselves in danger. And I guess that one of the solutions, and I don't think it's a very good one, but one of the solutions is you toss a coin.
Oh, really? Wow.
So in that case, you can't say it's not my fault. I've tossed a coin, and heads, the kid gets it. Tails, I lose it. So that's not a very happy one. But otherwise, then you have to come back to utilitarian theory. So what's the probability of the child being run over if I swerve versus what's the probability that I will die as the occupant of the vehicle? And then it comes back to you're making judgments around the value of each person. Do you actually prioritise somebody that's 4 years old, that's got 90 years left, more than the 80-year-old driver or occupant of the vehicle? All these kind of issues come forth.
Who regulates the way that these algorithms are kind of like set up?
Well, I think in the future, at the moment, this is I think it's a legal open area. But many organisations, mine included, are sort of thinking through getting ahead of the legislation to actually get codes of conduct. Maybe that's not a good thing after hearing your thing, but certainly in terms of how we're actually going to regulate the AI that's going to come. So I think that from a legal point of view, I think the legal, I'm not a lawyer, but I think the legal industry is going to have to catch up in terms of regulations around what is the transparency, what are the decision making, inherent in these machines.
And when it comes to like our use of social media and all that sort of stuff, like we're volunteering all this data as well, right? Is there a conversation that we should have with ourselves about our use and engagement with all these technologies where we're just volunteering, the inside story of who we are, basically,
Absolutely.
to all these outlets? Yeah,
I remember that there was a study done. I'm not sure how rigorous it was, but that people would give away their privacy for some imputed benefit of something like 50 cents. It was a ridiculous thing. So historically, I think most people are able, have been, or a segment of society anyway, been happy to give over their privacy for very little benefits. I think that is changing. I think people are generally, understanding that data has value. In fact, I think there's going to be organisations in the future that will almost be digital vaults, digital banks that will actually almost, capture your information and potentially, protect it or use it for your benefit, by getting a much better return, by sharing it with other organisations, but with your consent and for your good, ultimately.
Again, though, it seems to be it's an open question legally, though, right? Like this is all the future that needs to be mapped out, and people need to take active steps as well.
Look, to a certain degree, I think it's more mature in this space because you have a lot of privacy legislation. Right. And certainly in Europe with the GDPR has come out just recently, which has very strict rules around, tracking behaviour on websites and things like that. So there has to be a lot of disclosure for corporations at the moment around how data is collected and used. So I think that's only, that's a good thing from my perspective. But certainly I think, there's more that's going to have to happen down the track in terms of the usage of that data and what is acceptable and otherwise.
Yeah, okay. Well, as a concluding question, if we can get both of you guys in a nutshell to talk about your greatest fear and your greatest hope for the future of AI. Craig, let's start with you.
Okay, so I think, look, the greatest fear, I think, is not probably so much that, we have the robot overlords, but I do think that it's this extension of, the bad outcomes from an overuse or a binge. And I don't think that, again, I think it's an amplification of, the things that we're seeing already, with smartphone usage. And I think there's a risk that we actually become somehow less human. I mean, already, many of us are kind of we're wedded to our phones. If it goes off, in the middle of the night, we're wanting to know who's texting us. And I think a little bit of that is taking away from our humanity. I think there's already been studies. I think somebody referenced it earlier in the evening around the impact of social media on happiness, on sort of mental well-being. And I think that, it's an interesting study that's been done in terms of as technology improves, we thought we'd have all this spare time, and as you were saying, Sam, that hasn't turned out to be the case. We also thought that technology would make us happier as a society, but the research, over decades has basically said that as we get more technologically sound, we are not getting happier. which is quite a profound outcome. So I guess my greatest fear is that all this tech is going to be great and we get like really, a buzz out of it, but it actually does not, contribute to our well-being. The greatest hope, I guess, is the flip of that, is that we actually become more mature and somehow there's self-regulation in the way that we bring sort of, discipline to ourselves and our children to actually use it, in the right way, but disconnect, get out into nature, get real in terms of making sure that you're spending time with the relationships rather than online.
Which is virtue ethics as well, right, Sam?
It all comes back to virtue ethics.
What about you? Greatest fear, greatest hope?
Greatest fear is this is a powerful tool and it's being used in a very reductionist way, basically, profit for the shareholders. So the reason why you're hooked on your phone is they're wanting you hooked on your phone to click on more ads, to return more revenue, when we use that power for human flourishing rather than just getting me addicted to my phone. Greatest hope is just how this will free us up to be more human, more empathetic, more loving.
Cool. Would you please thank our panel?